On June 17th, the Native American groups were encamped along a small tributary of the Little Bighorn River, approximately 18 miles upstream from the location where General Custer's forces encountered them on the 25th. At this time, their encampment included around 200 standing lodges and 400 wickiups, or brush shelters, with an estimated 3,500 warriors. After forcing Colonel Reno's troops to retreat across the river, most of the native warriors left his position and moved to reinforce those engaging General Custer's column. Custer's forces attempted to cross at the mouth of the small stream, Medicine Tail Coulee, but when this proved unfeasible, they turned up a ridge, only to descend again upon reaching trails leading to the ford. The native warriors, concentrated in the ravines, unleashed a devastating barrage of gunfire from all directions. The soldiers faltered under the overwhelming attack, and the conflict devolved into close-quarters combat. Although the troops made several attempts to regroup, they were vastly outnumbered and quickly overrun. Within moments, none remained to recount what had occurred. The brief lull allowed Reno to regroup his forces on a sort of bluff and establish partial defensive positions. The Native Americans, confident they would eventually overpower him, largely ceased their assault for the night. Moreover, they had numerous dead and wounded to tend to. If Reno had tried to assist Custer's forces, he would almost certainly have faced the same fate. On the following day, the 27th, the advance of Terry's column was observed. As General Custer had struck them much sooner than expected, the Native Americans hastily broke camp, abandoning much of their equipment. The timely arrival of Terry's forces ensured the survival of Reno's contingent. During this engagement, approximately 40 Native Americans were killed, and many more sustained injuries. They acknowledged the courage and desperation of the white soldiers, recounting acts of individual bravery that even inspired respect among them. However, the details provided are too vague to definitively identify the individuals involved. It appears, though, that no prisoners were taken or subjected to torture, contrary to some reports. The Native Americans also noted that many of the soldiers' carbines were found with shells jammed in the chambers, rendering the weapons temporarily inoperable. The low number of casualties can be attributed to the remarkable ability of an Indian to protect himself. Unless struck in the brain, heart, or spine, there is no guarantee of death. I have personally observed many Indians who survived wounds of all kinds to the body and later displayed excellent health. This has convinced me that, among all creatures, they excel in resilience. They are extraordinary horsemen and skilled marksmen, achieving impressive accuracy both from the backs of their swift, hardy, and well-trained ponies and on foot. From a young age, they learn to use every hill, rock, tree, grass tuft, and natural feature to their advantage in securing game. Their expertise is further refined through continual conflicts with other tribes and with white settlers, making each warrior highly adept in their methods of combat. They require no orders to seize, press, or hold opportunities for success or to protect themselves during retreats. Each tribe is loosely divided into several bands, each led by a chief whose authority is largely constrained by the will of the group. Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull have been prominently highlighted in this conflict, with the effective fighting tactics and skillful retreats attributed to them. However, they do not deserve significantly more credit or blame than many others regarding planning and decisions. They did, however, lead two of the most dangerous bands on the plains and were among the fiercest leaders the Sioux Nation had produced in years. General Sheridan's comments. This report contains a great deal of fascinating information, and Lieutenant Clark's depiction of the Indians' aptitude for offensive warfare is highly accurate. However, the accounts provided by the Indians should be approached with a significant level of caution and skepticism, as they often tailor their descriptions to align with what they believe their interviewers wish to hear. As for the number of Indians involved in the battle and the casualties they suffered, the accounts vary widely. What is certain is that there were enough Indians present to decisively defeat the 7th Cavalry, which had been divided into 3 parts, and to completely overwhelm any one of these detachments in open combat. This was demonstrated in the destruction of one detachment along with its brave commander. The reasoning presented for why Major Reno remained on the bluff, which he later fortified and defended, is sound, but there are other equally compelling reasons. For example, he could not leave behind his wounded, who would have been killed by the enemy, and he was unaware of Custer's location or the dire circumstances he faced. It is reasonable to assume that Reno believed Colonel Custer would return to support him upon realizing the overwhelming numerical advantage of the Indians, with the goal of reuniting the regiment. The events surrounding the Battle of the Little Bighorn can be summarized succinctly. The Native Americans were initially caught off guard, and in the resulting confusion, exacerbated by the efforts of women and children to flee, Colonel Custer came to believe that the native forces were retreating and might evade him. Moreover, from the location where he left Major Reno, Custer could observe only a small section of the native camp and lacked an accurate sense of its full extent. As a result, he chose not to regroup his regiment to launch a coordinated attack at full strength. Instead, he instructed Major Reno to strike the village's upper end while he moved downstream on the opposite side of the bluffs, which obscured the river from his sight and concealed his movement from the native forces. With 5 companies of the 7th Cavalry, Custer reached a trail descending to the river opposite the camp's midpoint. Following this path nearly to the water, he then turned back without attempting to cross, evidenced by the absence of men or horses on either bank near the ford. Retracing his steps for several hundred yards, he ascended the fatal ridge where his body and those of his command were later discovered, seemingly intending to proceed to the lower end of the village to cross and mount an attack there. It was on this ridge where he became entirely encircled, and his forces were completely destroyed. There is no evidence to suggest that he attempted to retreat and reunite with Major Reno. Had he chosen to do so after reaching the aforementioned ford, Captain Benteen, having already joined Major Reno by that time, would have consolidated the regiment, enabling them to stand their ground or possibly even overcome the Indians. If the Indians had been truly aware of his approach, they likely would have moved out to confront him, as they had done against General Crook only 8 days earlier, allowing the women, children, and the village to evacuate. Additionally, if Colonel Custer had waited for his regiment to regroup and crossed at the location Major Reno used, then launched his attack on the open plain while positioning some of his men in the wooded area, the Indians present would not have been able to overpower him. I do not attribute Colonel Custer's decisions to recklessness or poor judgment, but rather to a misunderstanding of the circumstances and an overabundance of bravery.